join me in welcoming Connor to the stage.
All right. Ooh, that is sensitive. All right, guys. My name is Connor Greene, and I have ADHD. You may have heard that. It means that I struggle with regulation, so that means these 40 minutes will go one of two ways. Either I will ramble on until I run out of time, or I'll rush through everything as fast as I can and I'll stand up here for the next 20 minutes with a great sense of regret. So, that's why I have this entire thing written out. Because not only is my working memory like holding on to smoke, because I'll jump topics without any clear directive. So, what am I talking about today? Redefining neurodiverse disorders within society's framework, which sounds more complex than it is. I'm here to emphasise particular developments of society and how it affects not just those with ADHD, but drawing the parallels to other conditions, disorders, and neurotypes. After I'm done, I hope to have given you a different perspective on how to view the world, the expectations it has for us, and from there, you choose how to let it affect you. Let's start. Who here has heard that ADHD is overdiagnosed? Yeah. I actually enjoy hearing this statement recycled to me over and over because aside from having ADHD, I'm also autistic. And talking about this subject is my super special interest. It's like people invite me to info dump on them and my goodness, they're not ready for it. So, with everyone talking about overdiagnosed disorders, I thought we could start there. I'm constantly bombarded by people saying that ADHD isn't a mental disorder and that it can be a superpower and a blessing, highlighting all the positive aspects of the condition, but ignoring its limitations and why we have those limitations. But I feel that this is because the definition of disorder isn't well understood. We look at it simply as a negative word. Some even continue to base their arguments and dismissal of new disorders simply because generations ago they didn't exist. Internet gaming disorder, ARFID, hoarding disorder, skin picking disorder, which has a more complex name but I can't pronounce it. So, what is a disorder? There are three perspectives that we can go off. We have the American Psychiatric Association, which states mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behaviour. Mental illnesses can be associated with distress or problems functioning in social, work, or family activities, which is quite a bit vague, I'll admit. But then there's perspective two, Jerome Wakefield's perspective on mental disorders. This is my preferred definition, and he looks at mental disorders as a harmful dysfunction. He suggests that it's a breakdown in some biologically designed function designed to protect individuals from harm. This definition could cover a broad spectrum of situations, including harmful impulsive behaviours, dangerously compulsive eating or lack of eating, thoughts of self-harm or harm to others, or simply describing it as an interference in a person's daily life. Well, we do have one more perspective to cover. The 4 Ds of psychology: defiance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. By looking at all these perspectives on what defines a disorder, you can better understand on how ADHD can be considered a disorder. Putting aside all the commonly known traits and, the moving around, never sitting still, jumping from thing to thing to thing, those with ADHD are significantly higher risk of health complications, poor financial management, increased risk of injury, susceptible to drug and alcohol abuse, and even incarceration. And that's literally just scratching the surface of unmanaged ADHD. Now, this is where I might lose you all for a bit, but I promise you it's going somewhere. Following by the understanding and the definition of disorder it is important to understand that this is where or why some may be considered to suffer from ADHD at one stage in their life, but not at another. This can also be why you may have been diagnosed once before, and a doctor feels that they need to reassess you later in life. It all depends on whether the person's deficits are catered for at this current point in their life. Because if they don't encounter frequent dysfunction in their daily life, it wouldn't fall under the definition of disorder. This is also the same argument presented by people that say, but we all do that time to time. And of course we do. Everyone experiences behaviours of ADHD because they're human behaviours. It all depends on the frequency and the daily dysfunction in how it impacts you that makes it the definition of disorder. I've met some parents that will tell me that it seems as though their child just got worse once they hit high school. They can't keep track of their school books, their assignments are left to the last minute or forgotten about entirely. They wear the wrong uniform on the wrong days, they lose belongings for class, or when they move out of home, the dishes pile up in the sink, they have trouble holding down a job, they can't pay the bills on time and are constantly asking for money due to poor financial management. The parents would argue they didn't raise them this way. They taught them to clean up. They always did their chores. They were in bed on time and had a good sleep hygiene. But from out of nowhere, these ADHD symptoms and traits appear, and this adult child is diagnosed with ADHD. So how could this suddenly occur? It's always been there. They always had ADHD. The brain hasn't suddenly changed. So why do they feel all the symptoms and struggles? What has changed? It's their environment. As a child, I had routine. Same thing every day. Breakfast, school, lunch, come home, dinner, bed. But once I hit high school, I was given more freedom with more responsibility and more unpredictability, things to start balancing. This is where I started to fall apart. I remember I would leave assignments until the very last minute, right up until the night before, and oh, the courage it took to go and tap my mother on the shoulder, who's in the crowd, she remembers this, several hours after I've been to bed, to tell her that I have an assignment due in the morning and I haven't started a single word. So there would be, pulling out the crumpled paper from the bottom of the school bag, you know the one, it's just past the area where all the leftover food is that my parents would have to go through. Did I suddenly develop ADHD, or was it always there? And now my deficits were making day-to-day life dysfunctional. I always tell parents of children with ADHD that medication can be brilliant. It can be a great tool, it can make a strong difference, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. We need to change our environment as well, to adjust our lives to work around the deficits that we have. For that reason, it's important to understand and identify where our deficits are and how we can go to reduce impacting us. We need to make things visible. Time needs to be visible, deadlines visible, audible, constant. I don't mean make a system, I mean make it impossible to revert back. Because systems can get boring when we can slip up. If we didn't, that daily planner, organizer, or reminders everyone told us would fix our lives would have worked by now. Because out of sight, out of mind is so bad for us. Drawers, bags, cupboards, doom piles. In my house, and my roommate's going to absolutely love this one because she's here in the crowd, I would love to get rid of all the benches. Limit them all because they just become resting grounds for letters, keys, groceries, and all the things we haven't got the motivation to move to the other side of the room. A lot of what we identify as traits, struggles, deficits, or dysfunctions is very much dependent on the environment, our society, its culture. And with that, we're going to briefly move away from ADHD so that you can see the parallels, and because I think it's just such a great example. So let's look at a common trait seen in autism. This trait is something that many rely on in diagnosing autism, and that is eye contact. The inability to maintain eye contact is something many feel is an impactful social requirement to make it through society. This need to look someone in the eyes is a mark of respect. It is a way that it shows undivided attention. This singular trait has prevented so many from receiving a diagnosis, simply because they may have no trouble giving eye contact, or they can just give eye contact during the assessment. But what if I told you that in some cultures, giving direct eye contact can be seen as disrespectful? It is encouraged not to give eye contact. So suddenly, this impactful social requirement that can cause daily dysfunction in social settings and communication, this key diagnostic piece of the puzzle for identifying someone of a different neurotype has suddenly vanished. And just like that, we can see that a person has been socially limited by the wires that hold together our cultural expectations and the societal environment they live within, not by the wiring of their brain. So society plays a pivotal role in shaping how our mental health conditions are perceived. Those with ADHD often grapple with challenges related to self-regulation, time management, and working memory. In our daily lives, moments of distraction can cause time to slip away rapidly. Without constant reminders, we've missed appointments. Our window for getting ready for work ends now in overtime. We burnt the dinner because we said we would watch the time rather than setting an alarm. For those unsure of what working memory may be, it's the ability to hold information within our mental workspace to manipulate and use it from day-to-day lives. Examples of this would be being able to picture how furniture would look in a room before you start moving the furniture, or being able to remember what you wanted to say before the person has finished saying it. Even seemingly simple tasks like remembering your gas station pump number until you reach the counter can be a struggle. We've all been there. And so our ability to manage these symptoms are heavily influenced by the demands around us. Without reminders or physical cues, important information easily slips from our minds. Have you ever had to do that two-factor authentication, but your phone just won't copy the thing over, so you have to keep swapping between the apps one digit at a time? That's just one thing that our brains have to manage now that they didn't have to in the past. But it's just one thing, right? It's only one thing that's changed. Certainly, for our generation to struggle that much than previous generations, there couldn't have been that much changed. We have things so good. We have air conditioning, electricity. We don't have to hunt for food. Disease and starvation isn't rampant. We have comfy beds and orthopedic shoes. Everything is available at your fingertips. But the saying, you can have too much of a good thing, holds a little too much truth for our modern world. Let's take television, for example. I'm very proud of this slide. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, TV was primarily live. With just a few stations to choose from, most households were lucky to have 2 TVs. You couldn't pause or skip the ads. You had no control over the programming schedule, and it was all scheduled programming, which means if you missed a show, you missed it. In those days, you could keep track of time. You didn't realize it, but there were constant, consistent, visual and audible reminders for you. The news at 6 p.m, The Simpsons on Channel 10 at 7:30, Law and Order at 8:30. You had to brush your teeth between some of these shows at 7:30 and 8 because bedtime was the show another TV came on. You had ad breaks to rush to get things done, making it sort of a game to get back before the ads ended. You had urgency and challenge. Two key motivating factors for those with ADHD. Friday or Saturday night movies were family affairs where everyone gathered around the TV to watch together. It was a treat. It was a bit of social parallel play. You couldn't binge watch your favourite shows, you had to wait for the next episode. It created a sense of delayed gratification. Those with ADHD are terrible with the idea of delayed gratification. But this was forced on us. There was excitement, there was hype, there was conversations among friends with the previous episodes. Today, we have the ability to watch shows anytime, anywhere, and we often do it in the isolation of our rooms. We miss out on the shared laughter, witty commentary, and the discussions about what we've just watched. Most shows release all at once, or we choose when to watch them. We no longer make time to relax and watch because we can't miss it. We can always come back to it, watch it anytime. There's always tomorrow, right? People have never been on the same page on what to watch now. It's too much choice. Sometimes we can't even decide on what to watch ourselves. We hop, never giving a show a chance, never settling, minds always moving, always jumping, never settled. We simply end up binge watching everything, forgetting our responsibilities in between, left in a void, sitting there searching for the next hit. We removed delayed gratification, overwhelmed ourselves with choice, and eliminated the need to rush to get things done. We lost the ability to track time based on the TV schedules and isolated ourselves from friends and family without even realising it. But it isn't limited to television. It extends to many aspects of our lives. Everything demands our attention, from ads to apps to products on our devices and in our shops. Apps have compressed everything. Should put this on the thing. Apps have compressed everything. What used to be a book is now an app. My family, on holidays, we bring a physical camera and I loved every bit of it. But that's now an app. Libraries have become the internet. Grocery shopping, once a physical task, is now done on an app. Video games have evolved from community arcades to now in-home theatre systems with multiplayer capabilities where you have friends come over and you get to share the experience. But it's all being reduced now to the confines of your room. You don't need to go to the shops or buy any games anymore. It's all done online. Let's not forget game passes, microtransactions, and every single parent here knows the word V-Bucks. Even video games at their core have evolved, from story-driven adventures to being dopamine slot machines, constant light, sounds, V-Bucks, loud noises, loot crates, trapping kids in this perpetual field that goes round and round. It becomes evident that ADHD should be seen as a societal disorder, one that arises from the world not ideally suited to the way that we are wired. It's a lot easier to stay regulated when you haven't got such a demand on your nervous system, on your brain pulling left and right. So many families report to me that their children don't appear to need medication when they go camping or on holidays. It's because you're leaving behind all the demands of daily life. Their behaviour improves, their attention improves, their mood, their sleep, all improve. But because life can't always be a holiday, more and more individuals are being diagnosed with ADHD and facing significant challenges in navigating a world that is not fully accommodated for their unique cognitive abilities. ADHD isn't being overdiagnosed. It's simply becoming more apparent, harder to overlook, and more challenging to manage in the society that we've built. Now, who here feels as though they thrive better at night than they do during the day? Right. There's a good joke that I was told once. When did they have the conversation to make sure that society existed during the day? They must have had that meeting while we were asleep. Oh, did that actually? There we go. We have evidence showing that up until the 19th century, most within Western societies had a two-phase sleep cycle. sleeping for 3 hours, rising to do an assortment of things just past midnight, and then continuing to sleep for another 3 hours until dawn. This was normal. This is called biphasic sleep. It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that this type of sleep cycle was phased out to a non-interrupted sleep that consisted through the night. This was the new normal. And as society transitioned through this era where the day's activities were tightly synchronized to the setting and rising of the sun, those whose bodies did not align with this, they either had to adapt or, by today's standards, considered lazy and unhealthy in their habits. Thousands of years, our sleep worked a particular way, but now society changed it. I guess for those that couldn't adapt to today's sleeping requirements and it impacts their daily life, their ability to function, maybe they would be classed for a sleeping disorder. But what about while we're awake? I want to delve into what motivates those with ADHD. Interest, novelty, challenge, urgency, and passion. You'll notice that consequence isn't on there. And that's because it's not really a motivating factor for those with ADHD. The future, down the road, doesn't exist. It's only the immediate, the urgent. Otherwise, we've learned from all those countless times previous, but we don't. And so I want to focus on urgency more so than others. These motivating factors for someone with ADHD are so very significant to how we do things. These motivators are the same reasons as to why many forms of therapy don't often work for those with ADHD. That and the impulsivity is one of our major deficits. And most therapies require us to think, which is the exact opposite of impulsivity. It requires us to look at the small changes, the small steps, the long game, not the short one. I recall a conversation with a friend who proudly mentioned how she packed for a holiday in the final hour before her flight. She commended her ability on how it works so well under pressure. I offered a different perspective. You only work under pressure. Consider the act of cooking a meal. Motivation arises because the external factor of hunger is immediate, it's sudden, it's urgent. However, when it comes time to cleaning up, there is no immediate. The motivation disappears. Urgency is a potent motivator for those with ADHD. Paradoxically, it's also why we find ourselves overwhelmed and stressed, as tasks often need to reach a critical level of urgency before we can muster up the motivation to complete them. And so many of us feel as though we're stuck in a wheel, feeling like we just need a second to breathe. But we are always in a panic state because we could never get things done before it reached this point. And then somebody comes along and tells us, if you don't want to be so stressed and exhausted, just get to it now. But then we look at them and just say, I've just calmed down from the last thing. I need a second to breathe. And so it repeats. So now that we can see how the motivating factor of urgency works, let's have a look at how society has given us something that is so great, but oh so terrible for us. The act of grocery shopping becomes a motivated task when the cupboards are empty and you're driven by urgency of not having food. But in a world where options like Uber Eats, DoorDash, home delivery exist, the urgency diminishes. You can just order it from your phone. How great is that? But what don't you get out of this convenience? Well, you don't get that brain break, that movement break. You don't leave that sit-pit hyperfocus ADHD paralysis or even potentially depressive and anxious state that you've been locked in. Because you can just order food to the door and never see anyone. But what else is impacted? Well, due to the impulsivity and the inability to look forward in time, these small actions you don't see adding up in our heads. You don't see the greater consequence, and that is finances. Without visually seeing your finances and without the urgency of next week's bill, it's very easy for someone with ADHD to just click order, convinced that you will deal with the rest later because you need that break. And then you're met again by that overwhelming stress and burnout and the situations that you have caused for yourselves, and the cycle begins. ADHD isn't about the big things, it's the little ones that add up. Our phones have come to control so much of our lives. I'm sure we've all heard and are all aware that we should stay away from our phones late at night. But how many of you can't put it down? You struggle with self-regulation after all. You need the external factor and motivator to get that thing out of your hand. The outside motivator needs to hold you accountable. You might be able to put down the phone if you were fully energized, but when it's late and the day has called upon you to do so much, it's another story. So what if you tried to limit the amount of tech that we and our children use daily? It's a great idea. Many households I know and work within, that's not always possible. Sure, you can reduce it, but when the school schedules are on their laptops or iPads and their homework is education perfect and it requires you to buy an iPad, everything we need to live, function, have careers, sign kids up to schools and monitor what they're doing on their devices come from our devices. We have to go back to it at some point. Pull it from our pockets, and then we have that chance of falling down the rabbit hole again. If ADHD is a disorder of self-regulation or motivation, despite the fact that we know what to do, but we can't do what we know, how do we muster up the power to function through all this? Well, many of us take medication, stimulant medication, such as Ritalin, Concerta, Vyvanse, Dex. This can help some of us find the cognitive ability and the executive function control to navigate through the day. But then, you've also experienced medication shortages, specifically Vyvanse. Sydney Morning Herald wrote in 2018 that 1.4 million prescriptions were dispensed, and that number jumped to 3.2 million in 2002. This article, and many others like it, also followed with the words overdiagnosed. People looking for the easy way out after COVID. It's going as far as say that it was fashionable, gave reason to their faults, and they didn't have to admit to their shortcomings. It was very dismissive. It also reads very similar to another rise in prescriptions in our history that followed the exact same suit. That was pain medication. In the past, people seeking pain medication were considered lazy. They were told to push through it. In 1897, Bayer developed the drug aspirin, something we have readily available for pain management. But upon release, it was very controversial. It was seen as an escape from reality, not facing the harshness of life. Don't give a damn pills, as quoted by the newspaper articles at the time. But before we reach that, the point that we are at now, where taking Panadol is so normal, is the questions had to be asked on whose pain was worthy. How much support is too much? Can we deal with the pain in other ways? Is the pain even real? So how do you measure something as subjective as pain? How do you justify disability assistance for somebody who may appear to be perfectly able-bodied? It sounds so strange because we have a range of pain medication and nobody bats an eye. We understand that chronic pain can be debilitating and life-changing. People with chronic pain have to adapt their environment to suit their condition. Nowadays, it can be quite obvious to a lot of us that they are struggling with their nervous system. We could fill out a questionnaire on how it impacts them. If they struggle to get out of bed or carry something, can they hold a conversation on their worst days? Or what if they're good at masking their pain? Only letting out their discomfort at the end of the day, unseen by others? Or the kind of pain that only affects them in certain situations or activities? Because everyone experiences pain after all. How do we measure those? How do you warrant who needs assistance if we can't see the struggles or we see them as personal shortcomings? Everything would be fine if they just applied themselves. How do we measure children with inattentive ADHD? It's very common for this internalized ADHD to be diagnosed much later in life, and I should know, I was one of them. My report cards were littered with foreshadowing. And I'm fighting the battle right now for a kid to be recognised by their teachers for the often subtle signs. I'm not kidding. The teachers of this child had said that there were no issues within the classroom and that the child was always focused on work. Straight A's. No signs of ADHD. Then the child comes home, really excited to show me all the drawings that they had done throughout their book. 90% of their book were drawings. The occasional note was scrawled in the book, often upside down to the orientation of the book. But so how do we get those with inattentive ADHD noticed? Better education and understanding on spotting the symptoms as a neurological condition rather than a person's intentions of self-sabotage is a good start. School is specifically the first place, or typically the first place, where children are diagnosed and prescribed medication. So much so that the ADHD assessments like the Connors require a teacher to identify the symptoms in the classroom. It's even common for paediatricians to only suggest giving medication whilst at school and have breaks on all the other days. So there is a big focus on schools. Shouldn't that scream red flags that this artificial environment we have constructed doesn't align with ADHD? Now that isn't to disregard all those that struggle in other environments. I'll forget to put things away if I don't have my medication. But I want to focus on the environment that's a constant battle for parents. And for that, we have to look at how the schooling system first came about. Often referred to as the assembly line of education systems, the education model started in Prussia during the 1800s. It's the template for mainstream schools now. And the objective was to build a universal education system that could feed the economy and, more importantly, the workforce of, once again, the Industrial Revolution. It was even funded by factory owners, which is a smart investment after all. The industrial age required workers to be docile and agreeable, accepting to the timetables of their superiors. Workers were told when to eat, rest, take breaks. Their hours were not only unpleasant, but for men who had built their legacy of independence, this shift was emasculating and insulting. This was such a change to the way that people had orientated themselves for thousands of years that it required an entirely new form of education to mold people into what they required for the workforce. So here we have children who need brain breaks, need movement breaks, and now they're asked to be forced to be in a box where they must sit still, face the front, hands and feet flat on the floor, back up straight, quiet, listening. I hate that word. But it isn't just about behaviour, but also the understanding on how we think, how we process. The way we teach in schools, I couldn't work around how my brain works. I'm still trying to learn it myself, but I was never really shown. I was shown and told how they expected me to do it. I was very limited by this. My school grades dropped, my self-esteem dropped, and I started to hate learning as a result. Something I see in so many neurodivergent children. I had a teacher who tried to help me with an assignment by giving me a notepad to write down my ideas and thought process, but she said it was unorganised and had unrelated ramblings on a page. She told me that she had provided me with the tools, I had simply chosen not to use them appropriately. The same method of thinking has helped me diagnose programming errors, diagnose mechanical faults in cars, and it's even helped me put together ways to help clients as my brain shoots off in 1,000,001 different places, pulling bits and pieces from everywhere. Things that others don't feel are related, my brain finds the relationship. I can see the explosive diagram in my mind and it all comes back to me within an instant. I wish I could tell you how I do this. I wish I could draw it all down, but I can't. Doing maths, by the time I started counting any equation, I'd forgotten the first list of numbers. My working memory couldn't retain what it needs to carry over. I'd use my hands, my fingers, I'd use physical blocks, but I was put down for using visual aids. I remember I was told they were trying to teach us to use our heads because only the younger children use their fingers. I started hiding how I would count. I would count the angles of the numbers that I drew so that I could get away with it without anyone noticing. Limiting children's abilities to succeed by putting them in the same box and expecting those with a different neurological wiring to perform at the same rate has happened before. And it seems crazy to think that it wasn't actually that long ago. And that is the taboo of using your left hand. Not long ago, children in school faced punishment for using their left hand, and it was seen as evil to use anything but your right. Being right-handed was associated with purity and strength, right-hand man. Whereas left-handedness was seen as impure. Even the word sinister has its origins in the Latin word on the left side. Schools actively discouraged children from using their left hand, and they were made to feel that their natural tendencies were wrong. This treatment continued into the mid-1900s. Kids were forced to hide their talents and abilities. Their creative artistic potential remained hidden, never able to reach its full potential. Being dexterous with one hand meant that they couldn't really do sports without facing judgment. Might I point out, ambidextrous doesn't mean you can use both hands. It's the Latin word for two right hands. Looking back, it's clear how nonsensical and harmful that this discrimination was. It's just a nervous system, a different nervous system working things out differently. And it's very interesting, is that the percentage increase of left-handed people throughout the 1900s shot up as the discrimination reduced. I don't think anyone was saying, oh, you're only thinking that because you watched it on TikTok. Better understanding, better education, reduced stigma. So Nation Health Interview Study estimated childhood ADHD went from 6% in the 1990s to 10% in 2016. Adults diagnosed with ADHD are now 4 times higher than that of children, which, yes, if you missed them all in the 1990s, obviously. But hold on to these numbers, because it's a lot. Other sources have higher and lower percentages depending on their collection of data, countries of origin, years assessed, what fits their criteria. They say that 90% of children continue to experience ADHD symptoms into adulthood. And here's the big kicker. 75% of adults diagnosed now were not diagnosed in childhood. 75% of children were missed. In childhood, the ratio is 4 to 1, male to female, of being diagnosed. And adulthood, it is now split down the middle, male to female, which is great. It is great to see the compassion and understanding for women, because it's about damn time. There are many factors as to why the numbers of diagnosis are going up. Is it that it's overdiagnosed? I don't think so. Everyone seems to have ADHD now, and everyone is on medication for it. What do I have to say for it? So what? What if ADHD was more prevalent than we initially thought? Is it such a terrible thing to recognise that those affected require assistance, care and support? That our society is structured in a way that can be particularly challenging for individuals with ADHD? ADHD can be just as encumbering and burdensome as any other disorder, and it warrants more attention, more education, and more patience than it currently receives. So, I'm Greene. I have a societal disorder. I have ADHD.